Hello, all. It's DBJ with the man with the name hard to say. We're going to talk about narrative gaming, words, thoughts, feelings, or narrative gaming, and a little description and definition for the masses, and kind of take a look at how the sausage is made. Uh, why so many, I would say, experienced or maybe even veteran players do it, and why would there even be a controversy in narrative gaming? All right, so let's start with the WTF, the words, thoughts, and feelings. Yes, I know, kind of clickbaity, but whatever. Um, Narrative is an account of connected events, and how this applies to role playing can take many forms. Now, if you take narrative and break it down into its component parts and you remove narrative out of gaming, really it's just a matter of numbers resulting in other numbers, right? So let's take some classic D&D. You roll a die, D20, whatever, roll percentile dice, roll a dice pool. You come up with a number. The rules will tell you how to calculate that number, whether there's success or failure. If there is failure, some games have a rating on what kind of failure happens. If there's success, especially if it's in combat, you take another die, or depending on how high your roll is, that dictates your success in doing some particular action. So in classic Dungeons and Dragons, you roll a d20, maybe you add 3 to it through various modifications. You roll a number, add the 3, the end result, oh, you are effective, which means that you hit. You are ineffective, which means that your attack didn't do anything. Okay? If you did something, you pick up another die. That would be a damage die, or any sub portion thereof, whether it's stunning or charming someone or making them disappear to another world, right? You roll a die, classic 1d8. So you get a number between 1 and 8. You add or subtract a modifier to it. It subtracts from someone's hit points. You're done. All right. After you do that for about 15 minutes, the boredom sets in. Someone gets on their phone, and you're done. So why narrative? Well, first of all, narrative allows you to make an account of connected events, right? It allows one to shape a story around what is essentially a mechanical effect, primarily dealing with combat. By connecting those events, then you fill in the gaps with social interactions and what is better known as exploration, which is delving into the world. Now, those things may not have as many die rolls, but with narrative, you're able to describe those events. Now, a beginner narrative person will say, okay, I draw my long sword, I strike at the goblin. You go into the gaming part, roll some dice, see if you hit or miss, roll some damage. I strike the goblin in the neck, is green blood splurting on my blade, or something like that. All right. And although not necessary in the beginning, those events will not be connected to each other, right? I draw my sword and strike the goblin. All right. Game Master's turn. Goblin pulls its short, rusty, short sword and slashes at your middle. Player's turn. I backhand him with my sword to strike him across the throat, right? So you have this, okay, I do something, they do something. I do something, they do something. The second step to narrative is not just making an account of events, but making an account of connected events. So those connected events would mean, okay, I strike at the goblin, I miss, the goblin pulls his short sword, then you start describing, building off of the narrative that just happened before you and around you. I step back, dodging from his rusty, short sword. I step back 1, 2, 3, and on my third step back, I spin on my heel, spin using my shield to block his elbow, and I try to strike him from behind. Now, we are going to start getting into the part, because I already described what narrative is, already defined it. It's pretty simple, right? These are just words and descriptors that fill the gaps in between the dice, right? Now we're going to start getting into the thing that's the problem area, because I'm a narrative individual. I love narrative. But why would there be such hate? Like, why does it suck? Why would there be a counter motive to something like that, right? Well, let me describe the problem and see if you can find it. All right, so normally between die rolls and mechanics, there's a space, there's gaps, there are places where you can fill in a narrative that does not change the gaming effects. All right, so for example, I draw my sword and roll to attack. Goblin draws its weapon and goes to attack me. Now, in between how I look at it, because these are my words, my thoughts, my feelings, that there is space, there is gaps, there are beats of action. So there can be 1, 2, 3, 15 different parries, strikes, blows, moves, dodges, blocking an attack, stepping back, tripping and falling, pushing the other person back. Now, of course, 15 times, okay, maybe that might be going a little overboard, but you understand that you can have this back and forth, dodging, twisting, blocking, striking, to lead up to what would eventually be the next die roll or die action in the game. Now, some people going at this like little surface level might disagree with that, right? Because they would say, okay, well, if I draw my sword and strike and the goblin strikes me, the falling, pushing, striking, backhanding, tripping and falling, dropping my sword, I pick it up and regroup and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's not having any game effect, but you're performing things that are having a game effect, right? If you drop a sword, don't you have to take an action, a bonus action to pick it up? If you trip and fall, don't you have to take an action to stand? Okay, narrative gamers feel that the spaces, the gaps in between the numbers, for the most part, that do not affect the gaming statistics, is free reign to start creating dynamic stories, right? So instead of just standing still and going, I strike goblin, goblin strikes me, you have this area where goblin strikes, you strike him, he strikes at you, you block, you strike at him, he ducks and dodges, I strike at him, he strikes, it hits my shield, I strike at him, it bounces off of his helmet, he laughs and spits, and then he comes at me, with all participants ending up back at the exact location and conditions from the very last die roll, right? So, well, why would this be a bad thing? Well, let's start with the growth of narrative. And the growth of narrative often starts with game masters. And what I mean by growth of narrative is the game master, in my armchair experience, because I don't have any statistics on this, more and more I will see that game masters who utilize narrative will start utilizing the narrative and offer game statistic changing events based on the narrative of the players involved. What do I mean by that? Player strikes a goblin with sword. Player says, I want to cleave him across the head. Player rolls for damage, rolls pretty good, but doesn't take the goblin out. Now Game Master says, okay, you struck him across the head and his helmet spins, blinding him for a moment, right? Maybe that's because he only had 7 hit points. You knocked him down to 2 hit points. He's pretty much, he's pretty much dead. So that's a pretty hefty strike. Player did a really good job, rolled an 18 to hit him, granting the somewhat success, right? Granting that, oh, you did so much damage to this person that, yeah, they're weakened enough. They are limited in their ability. They do not have the ability to move and dodge as well as they could have. All right. Here comes the problems. Because if you read the rules in some games, basically a genesis off of Dungeons and Dragons, but not all games, sometimes causing games that use a numerical value for hits that do not have a similar reduction in ability, some players and game masters would say, well, you hit the goblin, but his abilities are not limited. This individual, this creature, this monster, this NPC, this player character is not easier to hit. They do not strike with less damage. They do not move with less speed unless the rules say so. Well, that may be okay, but as game masters, and this genesis starts with game masters, I think, game masters say, well, I want to grant my players the ability, not the ability, they want to grant their players the reward for engaging in the story, which is being more active in using narrative, and for making the rolls and not stealing the moment away from the mechanical portion of the game. In other words, if you need to roll a 12 or more on a 20-sided, one player rolls a 12, one player rolls an 18, and another one rolls a 19, numerically, those spaces in the die rolls have no effect, right? There is nothing different between rolling a 12 or a 14 or a 16 or a 17, okay? As long as you need to roll, say, a 12 or more, right? Usually that's reserved for Dungeons & Dragons by rolling a 1 or a 20 called a critical success or critical failure, and even that in itself is often a house rule. That is not a given. Even Pathfinder, you have to check for that, all right, as a rule, not a house rule, but an actual rule. That being said, some players, some game masters will, when they want their games and they want to have their players interact more, when someone rolls a string of 16s, 17s, and 18s, that's pretty damn good, right, numerically. But the game doesn't reflect that. So instead, what they offer is an incentive by using the narrative, right? Let me go to another example. Player characters, average of 3 feet to 7 feet tall, fight giant, right? Average of 15 to 18 feet tall. Well, they say, hey, I'm going to strike at his ankles. I want to cut his Achilles heel. I'm hitting his tendons. I'm striking at his thigh. All right? It has 100 points of health. They knock it down to 50. Game Master says, well, he's slow. He can't chase you as far. He drops to one knee. It's easier to strike him in the head. The blood's running down his thigh and his Achilles heel is cut. Easier to sneak from behind him from the pain, from being impaled by a spear or something like that. These are all narrative effects. But the problem comes in when the narrative creates a game-altering effect. Now, on the Game Master side, this really doesn't matter much. Okay, it makes a lot of, people say, well, it makes sense. You're cutting a giant, you're hitting at the goblin, and goblins are pretty crunchy creatures. You spin his helmet around, he's blinded for a moment, whatever. You're striking at the giant. All 5 of you guys are piling on the giant. You cut him in the legs. He's down about half his ability. Okay, he's done. But the situation comes in when the same air quotes rules are applied to the players. The monster attacks the player and strikes you with, a vast amount of damage. You lay stunned. Well, there's no stunning in the game, but by using the rule of narrative and accounting of connected events, that by connecting each event and building off of the last event that happened to each of the participants in that, usually combat or social encounter or exploration, you're climbing down a deep pit into the earth or something of that nature, that those events are connected on top of each other. The goblin who was just stunned is not taken out by the mighty fighter, and the goblin screams, bloody murder, knowing that his life is in the hands of this great warrior or something, and takes his helmet off and flings it at the at the warrior, knowing that his end is near or something. That is a narrative effect. There's no reason for this goblin to take his helmet off and throw it, except for the event that happened beforehand. He was struck, he got his ass kicked. Now he doesn't want to die, right? So it's a narrative effect. The player didn't roll an intimidation attack, but the goblin just saw his friends get his ass kicked. Now this fighter's coming after him, easily maneuvers away from his attack, smashes him in the head, cracks his favorite helmet, and now the goblin's just like, oh, I don't want to die, please don't kill me, right? Or the giant. Giant sees that he's surrounded by these, what it thought were pipsqueaks. They start piling on him as he gets zapped by wizards and cut down by fighters, and something stabbing him in the back, and it hurts more than a little bit of a sting, and realizes that it's going to pick up its club and sweep everyone away, or grab whatever it's on its back and throw it off or something like that, because it knows that it doesn't see it, but it feels a pinch in its back, and it's going to grab on its shoulder and rip whoever it is off of them, because it is building off of those events. All right, so those are actions and reactions based on narrative. But then you have gaming effects. Now the gaming effects, you can have controversy when a game master says something to the effect of, the giant swings at you with its club, desperate to survive, and knocks you down, and you drop your sword. You've taken 38 points of damage. This takes away 75% of your hit points, right? And the player may say, well, yeah, I'll subtract the hit points, but I'm not any, I don't take any less damage. I mean, I'm not any weaker. I'm very sorry. I'm not any weaker. I shouldn't have to drop anything. I don't have to make a save. There are game rules for that, which is true, right? Which means that in the social contract, these kind of elements should be discussed ahead of time. Now, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons adds something in there, and it adds in a Benny. And a Benny is a benefit for role-playing. And a game master could say, well, you know what? I'll give you a point of, I'll give you an inspiration, 20-sided die. I'll give you inspiration if you succumb to the giant's, horrible blow, right? And the player goes, okay, all right, I'll take the inspiration. I get knocked down, and my spell fizzles out and is disrupted because of the massive damage that I take. Or my barbarian is thrown across the room and slams his back into the wall, dropping his shield and his sword at his knees. And I'm holding on to my ribs as I gather my strength back, whatever, right? You can do that. It's not necessary to have a game mechanical altering effect in a narrative, but sometimes it could be apparent. Someone drops a tapestry over a player character's head they can't see, right? Someone spills a cauldron of oil on the ground, maybe it's slippery, or it can be ignited or something, right? Boy, it was something dusty. So, but let me get into an even deeper controversy. Other than game masters offering modifications to the rules based on the narrative alone. Now we're going to get into the deep dungeons of sausage making, and that is players who would play in the game and create their own negative effects based on the narrative, but the game mechanics do not support the negative effect that they're causing. Give you an example. Players defeat the goblins. They take out the giant. Maybe it's a hill giant or something. They go into the next room. Game master describes this beast with black claws and dark scales and oily, and acid drips from its maw, and it comes around the corner, breathing heavy, and it speaks in its with a long lizard-like tongue and eyes, deep as obsidian, and says, "You have taken care of those that have, guarded my my hoard and treasure, but now you must deal with me." right? And before anything happens, anyone has any die rolls, one player goes, you know, I drop to my knees and you know, hold my hands together and pray for forgiveness, or what the hell, I'm not fighting that thing, I just run for it. Or someone else says, you know what, I normally have 58 hit points, I'm only at 3 hit points. I just pass out against and lean against the wall because I'm just too tired to fight or something. Game wise, statistically wise, maybe this game, talking 5th edition, but there are plenty of games out there which do not have a negative mechanical effect for the players to do something, but the players themselves decide to place themselves into a weakened stature. Oftentimes pisses off those who are far more of a gamist than a narrativist gamer. In other words, someone says, I've got 3 hit points left, but my character, game-wise, is not any weaker than anybody else's character at this very moment. If I act first, I could kill this thing. It's probably a black dragon or something like that, and I'm gonna kill it because I have, you know, 2 more uses of, and name the feat or spell ability or magic item or combat, you know, combo or technique or something. I'm going to use it. Now, that person is in this group and finds this other character who drops to his knees praying and is wondering, like, what the hell? Like, we can all, if we roll initiative and we get the initiative, we can all attack this thing and kill it. Why are you deciding to not play your character in the optimized state that it is in? Controversy, conflict. This is why some people don't like narrative players, which is why you need to discuss these things. You need to understand, and I know it might be like, well, how do you discuss a situation that may not happen in a game? You got to bring it up. Social contract. It is, do I want to be immersed in that situation? Would my character, who has never seen an oily-breathed, foul-mouthed, you know, 16-ton lizard creature that's intelligent, would he stand up and fight it? Well, depends on the kind of game. Is it more cinematic? Has he seen it before? Is it really immersive? Is it not? It's all based on players and the game masters' desire for what they want out of the game. And I believe that in many ways, those things should be said up front. So I've gone on quite a bit, but I will summarize by saying that narrative gaming is describing events using the die rolls or mechanics in the game, whether it's climbing a wall, convincing a guard, or striking a goblin in the head, shooting a laser rifle, or crawling along the outside of a starship in, you know, 0G in a vacuum. The second step would be describing the open areas in the die rolls, right? It is the spaces between the die rolls, whether it is trying to convince the guard and you reach in your pocket and just happen to finger through some cash when you want to make another convince roll, whether it is you're climbing up a wall and you're trying to lend a hand to another player character and you're telling them to be quiet because you know you're quieter than they are and they have, you know, clunky armor and they're not used to climbing, and you're just having a back and forth in terms of dialogue that has nothing to do with the die rolls involved. That's narrative gaming. And then there's in combat where you can voice things. I'll have it thee. I'll strike you dead. Hey Joe, watch out! They're coming from behind you, and you'll never get away with this. You know, the dialogue portion of it, the spaces in between the die rolls where it is like strike, parry, move. I step back 2 times and then twist on my heel. You know, the blade slashes across my shirt, cutting it but missing my stomach, and sweat drips down from my brow, and I pray to the gods that this won't happen again. All the way to now, I'm going to use my narrative to try to describe a benefit or a penalty in game, mechanical benefit or penalty, using just narrative to affect the game. So the contention comes in whether it's legitimate or not. Oh, I forgot. One last thing. Damn, almost forgot. Another reason why narrative gamers can have such a problem with people who are far more gamist. Gamist meaning like they prefer the rules of the game without modifying them beyond those that are agreed upon before before engaging in the game. Some games require you to spend points, pick attributes, go for a particular building style. And those players that have gone through the trouble of, say, they're playing GURPS and they spent 38 points to, make themselves convincing and carousing and, into diplomacy or something, or someone builds a Dungeons and Dragons character and they want their character to be a dual sword wielding, bladesmith or something of that nature. They don't want their actions using the rules to build their character to be superseded by someone else who did not do the same thing, but instead use a narrative to gain a similar or the same bonus without having to modify their characters to do so. So an example would be, because I guess the video is not going to be as short as I thought. So an example would be, someone makes a character who's very charismatic, and they spend the points to do so. Dungeons and Dragons, they get a high charisma. In World of Darkness, they get a high manipulation and charisma and appearance. They get some skills that go with it, whether it's diplomacy, persuasion, seduction, or something like that. Player A makes their character, but player B does not do the same thing. They've got an average charisma. Dungeons and Dragons, they've got like a 12 charisma. They maybe have 1 point persuasion or something. But that player uses narrative to say, well, I'm going to wine and dine this person. I'm going to spend money on a nice outfit. I'm going to flatter them. I'm going to find out what their favorite food is. I'm going to hire a minstrel to play their favorite songs. And then you're like, well, okay, well, they get a bonus, but I didn't do those things, but I spent those points on my character. Why does that individual get a bonus and I don't, right? Got to discuss those things. And that's where the contention, that's where the conflict, that's where you get people who may have been burned because maybe a game master prefers one style over another and does not grant either equal precedence over one or the other, granting equal weight. One person created a character to do these things, another person engages in the story. So as a player, you may want to find out, what does your game master value more? Because maybe your game master will tell you, well, don't bother spending those points on those things. As long as you're engaged in my story, I'll grant you the benefit to do that, or the other way around. You know what? Great descriptor, but really, even after spending all those things, your character still has a 12 charisma. You can wine and dine someone all you want, but I'm going to give it to the person who's more charismatic because maybe they're in their feeling, you doing all of those things is part of your lower charisma, meaning maybe you screw it up. Maybe you don't get the right music. Maybe you think it's wining and dining someone, but it just doesn't sit right. All right. So lastly would be players who play weak, or players who want bonuses. But players who play weak, I think, cause more of a problem, especially with those who like to play in an optimized manner. Hey, my character gets the highest bonus with strength, and I picked a weapon that offers me my highest bonus with my strength, and then I want to strike a creature using my strongest ability. Why would I choose not to do those things? It's the issue where the player makes a character who's fast, so always goes first, does the most damage, kills everything before the other players do something, and then wonders why those other players are upset because by the time the fifth player gets to do something, all the enemies are dead. And then say, well, it's not my fault. The rules allow me to be first, do the most damage. You decided to play a character that is weaker and slower than mine. It is not my fault. But a narrative player would say, well, you know what? We're all part of the same game. We all want to have fun. You can decide not to be that way. You can decide not to play in an optimized manner. You can decide to allow others to take part in an adventure by not playing your character in its optimal way, which intrudes on someone else's gameplay. Again, conflict of narrative, right? Who's right? The person that decided to play the game by the rules, but the rules interrupted the individual, or the narrative person who's saying, well, dude, you don't, okay, you got to go first 3 times in a row. It's the 4th combat. Back off or something so the rest of us can do something, right? It depends on where you fall. Now, I've already stated up front that I'm an admitted narrative gamer, right? But I'm not so blinded and short-sighted not to understand why these things can cause problems and why it is that you can create a divide and people not know why or where the divide came from. So I'm going to end it here by saying these are my words, thoughts, and feelings. You know, WTF about what is narrative gaming. I'm sure there are many things that I'm missing. As usual with all my ranting and raving, I've used to, when I first started this like over a year ago, I tried to make a list of things and be more organized, but it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel natural to me. So I would hope that somebody else who's far more eloquent and organized maybe sees this video, has some video responses on what they feel narrative gaming is. And as always, thank you for watching, for participating, for fueling me. I really appreciate it. I'm not exactly sure how the hell I'm creeping towards 1,000 subscribers when there's so many people out there that I look at, I listen to on a daily basis that have so much to add to the gaming hobby. You know, maybe I should do it. Well, see, it'll age itself because I could do a video just naming off all the people that I subscribe to and listen to, but then it gets we'll figure something out because I got to do something. I got to make a thank you, and I haven't figured out what the thank you is. So as always, I like to do my little create, don't destroy kind of thing on the end. And as far as being creative, try to find a balance based on your gaming group to use narrative, because I feel like narrative is that golden nugget. It's like that spice that you throw on top of a really bland meal to make it like, you know, it's like you have to add a little bit. It needs a little more salt. It needs some paprika. It's not quite sweet enough. You know what I mean? It's like it's not quite right for you, but there's a way to please everybody else. Because if you add a little too much salt, someone else is like, oh, it's too salty. I can't eat this. You know, that's too much pepper. I don't like it when it's too spicy. You know, so figure out that fine line to be able to grab to insert what you want without destroying somebody else's either desire not to have as much narrative affect the world, or to not have your narrative impede on what they prefer out of the game. And especially, lastly, would be to create an environment where you can openly discuss things. I mean, 99.9% of all the advice all us, armchair pundits like to give out is social contract and talk about it up front before all this, BS starts, right? Before you start to hate, before you start having these vacuum arguments about who's more powerful, who can do what. That's not right. That's overpowered. This rule sucks. When it really boils down to what is it you're looking for, and can you have a middle ground with someone else? So as always, DBJ, and I'm out. Thank you very much.